says that the Spirit drove him out to the desert. And the Greek word for that is ekbalo. And we actually use it in the liturgy. Did you know that? The same word, to drive out, to cast out, or to throw into. Is all the ways that ekbalo gets translated. If you want, I'll use it at the end of the Mass. Get out of here, the Mass is ended. Go, right? Go forth, we've made it all pretty. But in reality, it's get out. Right? If we all just spent all our time in here, what is that? Pope Francis said that early in his pontificate, right? That the church is more field hospital than just kind of putting together these sacramental things that happen in here. All wonderful and awesome and strengthening and enriching to our faith. But if it doesn't go out, what is it? And so in his absolute laser-focused desire to follow God, the Spirit drives him out into the desert. And I want to be careful because I don't think that God does that to us the way that Jesus surrendered to it in the Spirit in the story. Because when we take our difficult times, because here's the thing, time out, right? There are difficult things that happen, first truth of life. Sometimes when I start these, people go, you never finish them. I said, that's a parish mission I give on the 5 truths of life, so you'll have to come to one of those. But the first truth of life is that life is hard. Life's hard. And there are things that happen, and that kind of goes to the last translation of ekbalo. Sometimes we're thrown into something. And I'm not one that believes that God causes suffering. But God works powerfully in suffering if we'll let God minister in that space. There's the distinction. It's a pretty important one, particularly as we start Lent. And whatever it is that you're bringing to this liturgy, that we understand how it is that God works in that space. And so that as he goes out into that desert and is tested, it's interesting that the very next thing that happens in his life is the proclamation, is his first proclamation. Because I don't know about you, but for me, when I've had my faith tested, or when I've been thrown into a situation that tests faith or makes me wonder or doubt or any of those things that come with difficulty in our lives, the thing that people can do for me, if they're trying to be of service to me in that space, part of it is to just listen. To listen to the experience. That as I try to unpack it a little bit in my life, like, I don't know, this thing happened, and then I don't know, this led to that, and I think it's this, and that gives them the opportunity to, oh, have you thought of this? Maybe you've been through a similar experience. Right? There's that wise old story where the guy approaches the guy who's practically a saint and says, how does one live a holy life? And he says 2 words, right choices. Oh, great. Hey, thanks. Wait, well, how do you know to make right choices? And what does he say? Anyone know this joke? It's funny, I know the end of the joke, but I forgot the middle part. No one knows this joke? Well, that's the end of the joke. He said something about, growth. That's what it was. Middle is growth. Thanks, you stirred it out of me anyway. He says, well, how do you know how to make right choices? And he says, one word, growth. And then he starts to walk away. He comes back and says, well, how do you grow? And he says, wrong choices. Right? The connectedness of that. And so that when we work together through that, that's the whole point of the faith. Now, he does that alone. Right? He does that. He's driven out into the desert, although you see the 2 things. He's got wild beasts and angels ministering to him. Diakonia, they're ministering to him. And when that trial is over, he announces it for the first time. So what about us on this journey? It isn't just about sacrificing the things that we give up. It's about hoping that what we create is more simplicity in our lives, more of a focus in our lives. This discipline of Lent. And hopefully that as we feed less on certain things, it leaves room for other things. Sometimes that's physical food. Sometimes that's where we spend our time. Or the language that we use. Or whatever. All the different ways that shapes us. And if you're sitting at the start of Lent and saying, I don't know, I'm not sure where to put my time of thinking. I'm not sure what it is that needs to change in my life. Then dial up the desert. Spend a little more time stepping away from a number of things so that God can show you. As I said, we don't have to go looking for suffering. We don't have to go looking for the difficulty. But if we will, in the midst of that space, spend some time with God there, then great and powerful things can happen, particularly when we also connect ourselves back to the community. There it is. Here is what Lent can do for us as a discipline. It isn't magic. It doesn't mean, well, I say this, and then I get this, and then that happens. But as I said at the beginning of this liturgy, the one thing that you can say is that Jesus perfectly follows the will of God through his whole life, as he perfectly follows the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And by the way, part of that perfection was his own sweating his blood and saying, on the night before it happened, if there's some other way to do this, let's talk about it. It's very human, it's very real. But as he went through that whole journey, it was with his apostles, it was with his disciples, and it was also with a number of humans that continued to test him, that continued to tempt him and push him. And so as we start our journey in earnest, as I said, it's never alone. It's never alone as we relate as a community, and it's always going to begin with his presence in this Eucharist, that he wants to feed us so that as we go through this discipline, this learning experience, trying to understand right choices that come through the growth of wrong choices, this is the God who loved us into existence, in hopes that when this amazing sacred mystery is completed, we get out of here, that we are cast out and cast into the very spaces and places that need to know his love and his mercy. May God be praised.